I have the pleasure of welcoming everyone to Breaking Out of Our Communities of Complaint, presented by Danny Ceballos today. Please note that you can access materials for this session on today's live virtual conference platform within the description of this session. The session is being recorded and will be posted on our Now Conference website and YouTube channel for broader viewing access after the conference has concluded. In today's session, you will be muted. Please add any questions you have to the chat. You can also message me directly if you wish for your question to remain anonymous. There is live closed captioning available, and please click the CC box at the bottom of the screen to allow for subtitles. With that, I'm happy to introduce to you our presenter, Danny Ceballos of Unleashed Consulting. He is the current CEO and is a seasoned organizational leader, management trainer, and executive coach with 25 years of experience in for-profit and nonprofit management. Danny has worked with hundreds of highly motivated middle and senior managers to excel in their performance, to bring lasting change and high impact strategy execution to their teams and organizations. He specializes in DEI work, building better bosses with his training and coaching work. So I'll give the floor to Danny and let him introduce himself as well.
Great, thanks, Luis. There we go, great. So hello. My name is Danny Ceballos. I am the CEO of Unleashed Consulting. We are a small boutique firm that provides executive coaching, management training, and support to organizations large and small across the country, building better bosses. I am joining you from upstate New York in Binghamton, New York, where I recently relocated. After spending 30 years in the Bay Area, I relocated back to Binghamton because I'm closer to my family. And so it feels really good to be here. And I understand we're missing some of the hot weather that you're all going to be experiencing, those of you that are in California and in the Bay Area. And I was just telling Luis, it's always nice when we're experiencing weather that's a little bit nicer than what you're experiencing out there. I miss California very much, but I'm delighted to join you here. Welcome, everybody. You can see I go by, my pronouns are he, him, and hey, because I like to throw a little bit of flavor. And we're going to be talking about communities of complaint. So given the technology that we have and the size of the group, it's going to be pretty much one-sided with just me talking. However, as Luis said, as things happen, yes, Kristen, move to 607, yes. But if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to throw them in chat, and we'll moderate those. And I hope there'll be some time at the end for some Q&A. So why this topic? So this is something that I have been figuring out for the past bunch of years, and it really started about 15 years ago in the last job that I had within an organization. And I was at a fairly high level in the organization, and I had a very good team that worked for me, really strong team. But there was something that was really interesting about this team that was familiar with other teams that I worked with, but for this team, it was particularly prevalent. And that was that there was a lot of complaining. And what I noticed was eventually is that there's almost a connection that happens through complaining. And the more I tried to resist that, the more I found myself really not having a choice and instead falling victim to the seductiveness of complaining and actually adding to that. So it was no longer my course correcting them to move away from complaint and into more productive conversations. Instead, I was adding to the complaining, and I was surprised by it, but I also knew this was the way that I could get their attention. This was the way that I could actually act like the supervisor that I wanted to be. So, but it tended to spin out of control. Everybody was so close to each other, but the complaining was out of hand. So I started thinking about it over the past few years. How could I have done something differently? How could I have kept the connection and lose the complaint? And the more research that I did into it, the more I realized there's a different way of looking at complaining. And so that's what I'm going to be proposing to you today. So I'm going to invite you to go with me in thinking about your own complaining, right? If you do that, or if you're working with folks that complain, or you've got complainers in your family, and let's see if we can just extend some space and grace to all of us who are complainers and see if we can repurpose that complaining in a way that's more productive. So when I started to do the research around this and pull things together, it started to appear to me that there are 4 different ways of looking at communities in organizations. And I started to think about what those communities look like and what they had in common. And so I came up with a bit of a graphic here that will show the 4 communities that I think exist in an organization and how they differ from each other. So you can see that I'm mapping them on 2 axes. It's on the connection axis and on the power axis. So when I'm talking about connection, I'm talking about that kind of interpersonal connection that we all crave, and that we all want in places where we work, that interpersonal connection. And the power is a little bit different. The power is more about both the informal and the formal power that happens in organizations based on position, based on a whole bunch of things, including access to privilege, identity, all those things. And so what came up for me were 4 communities. First is the community of compliance. Compliance is where you need to do certain things and there isn't any leeway around that. Sometimes that comes from a good place. More often than not, it comes from a bad place. So in my estimation, that was little connection, little real interpersonal connection, and actually really not that much power, at least not much personal power that was going on. Absolutely, there was larger pictures of power happening, but by and large, the individuals who were involved in that community did not have much power. I contrasted that with a community of coercion, where there was clearly power on one side, usually at the boss side, at the management side, not a lot of power on the direct report side. And then I started thinking about, well, what's a community of commitment look like? What's kind of the best? The best of both worlds is where there is power all around. We are sharing power. We all have power and we're able to connect. And then lastly, to contrast it, and the name of this presentation is the community of complaint. Community of complaint, in my estimation, is where there is very little power. The individuals have little power. However, there's a high degree of connection. So we're gonna test that out in just a moment here. But basically what we're gonna be doing over the next hour or so is to start to understand how we can move from what I call a community of complaint to a community of commitment. So what does the research tell us about complaining? So first of all, the average person complains once every minute during any conversation. Moreover, most people complain at least 15 to 20 times a day. Secondly, a majority of employees across the organization, it's across sectors, spend 10 or more hours per month complaining or listening to others complain about their bosses or upper management. And again, as we're going through this, I want you to think about this if this is true for you, or if it's true for that folks that you know. I want you to become familiar with the statistics that I'm putting out here and see if you can personalize them. Thirdly, is even more amazing, almost a third of these employees spend 20 hours a month, 20 hours or more per month doing so. So we know we've got an issue here. We know that we enjoy complaining for whatever reason, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to have a quick breakout. So you're going to be put in a breakout room with four other people, 3 or 4 other people, and you're going to have about 5 minutes. And I'm going to ask you to just play with me on this and have a complaint fest. So you're going to kind of role play around this, where you're going to be thinking about, imagine that all of you are on a team. You all have a boss that you don't care for. You epitomize this boss as someone who micromanages, is short with you, is all business, and pushes all your buttons. And I just want you to kind of free form with this and have a conversation with each other about your feelings. And I also want you to resist any urge to be positive. We really want this to be a complaint fest. And so with that, Louis, I'm going to ask you, if you could put folks into groups, and I'll see you all in about 5 minutes. And welcome back, y'all. We're waiting just until the breakout room closes. Hopefully you had a little bit of a festival, a little bit of a complaint party. Welcome back, everybody.
Recorded.
Yeah, I love the phrase sharing worst practices.
Yes. There you go. Yeah, super important. You don't leave the presentation yet, okay? Because this is, if you walk away thinking this is what we're doing, this is not the end all. Great. Welcome back, everybody. All righty. So we did that, hopefully, to have an experience where you started to feel some of the emotions that go along with complaining. So I want to read you something here that I think helps to understand complaining. So here's what happens when we're complaining. Somebody annoys us. We're dissatisfied with how they're behaving. Maybe we're angry, frustrated, or threatened. Those feelings build up as energy in our bodies, literally creating physical discomfort. That's why they call them feelings, because we actually physically feel them. And when we complain about someone else, the uncomfortable feeling begins to dissipate because complaining releases the pent-up energy. That's why we say things like, I'm venting, or I'm blowing off steam. But we'll see in just a moment that dissipation doesn't really just release the energy, it spreads it, which actually makes it grow. Additionally, when we complain to people who seem to agree with us, and we almost always complain to people who seem to agree with us, we solicit comfort, camaraderie, connection, support, and justification, which counteracts the bad feelings with some fresh, new good ones. Complaining changes the balance of negative and positive energy, and for a brief moment at least, we feel better. It's actually a pretty reliable process, addictive even. So my question to you is, what happened in your breakout? So what was it? Is there anything that you can point to that actually strengthened the relationships that you have? So I see we're not a huge group here. So I see a hand from Heidi, and Heidi, I'm wondering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, hi all. I didn't know the person I was in the chat with, and we immediately created a bond through our complaining.
Yeah. What was that bond?
I don't know.
Okay.
She was my best friend ever.
There you go. Exactly. It's something that happens. Very interesting. How about it? Somebody else? Anything else? What else added to your relationships? Right, Sharon. Yes, yes. It was pretty difficult to complain on demand. What else? Anybody else? What else added to the relationship? My group bonded over, oops. Oh, now we're getting there. My group bonded over tales of previous bad bosses. That's right. So there's a common history. You get validated for your feelings, as Denora says. Rachel says, my chat room buddy and I also bonded over complaining and had similar issues with leadership. Carmen says, I felt understood. Jan says, shared experience. Exactly. So there's a lot that happens with complaining. My experience has been that oftentimes that's the first thing that we go to, because it's a common point of interest for even for strangers. And it's something about the common enemy that we share. I mean, this is, a lot of the work that I do is around team building. And a big portion of team building is recognizing that a team that comes together actually has a, quote unquote, common enemy. So it's the same when we come together in complaints. We start to come together thinking that there's something outside of us, but it's you and us together on this. And so there becomes this really close personal connection. Denora says, also people tend to focus more easily on the negative than on the positive. Indeed. So we're going to be talking about that. There's a negativity bias that we're actually wired for, so that we actually go towards the negative over the positive. It comes from our limbic system. It comes from, thousands of years of development. It served us very well in the past. It doesn't serve us very well now. We're not worrying too much about being eaten, although that's metaphorically we are, but physically in reality, we're not. Yes, and Angela says it actually stirs up prior feelings, experiences, so we start to connect around those as well. Is there anything in there that detracted from your relationship? So if you were looking to become closer with this person, is there anything that detracted from your relationships? Shelley.
Hi, yeah, I think in our group, we had a group of 4 and we kind of got sad, and we were really disappointed in a lot of the things that we were bringing up. Like, we did connect on all of these things. We had shared experiences, but it just felt bad to like have all this venting that we were doing. So I think it did kind of distract in a way from our relationships.
Yeah. There's something very, you see what Kristen says, oh, wow, I was jazzed, right? So there's something really interesting that happens around the connection that we have, that emotional connection that we have, But by and large, what we know from complaining is that it tends to be fairly empty, fairly two-dimensional. It doesn't seem to go anywhere as part of the problem. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So that may have been some of the sadness that you were experiencing, is like, well, what else is there here? What else is there? So, that personal relationship and that affinity that we have with each other around complaining is pretty shallow in a lot of ways. So it's no wonder that you felt a little bit of that sadness that came up for you. Yeah, it's a weird mix of exhilaration and tiredness. Denora says it doesn't actually feel good to bolster cynicism. Yeah, so it doesn't in the long run, oftentimes in the short run, and Denora, I'm thinking Denora is pretty evolved in a lot of ways. I think most of us are, and so we can kind of catch this. But again, there's a real seductive quality to complaining that pulls us in, that says, let's be in this together, let's add to the fire. It also makes you feel suspicious. Like if people say this about another person, yes. And so there's actually some good research about saying, that ultimately complaining becomes part of the brand of the team or the organization or the function or the division or the community. And you start to gain a reputation for complaining. And so in that way, it doesn't serve you at all. A guilty pleasure. That's a perfect way of putting it. Heidi, do you have another comment?
Is this an appropriate time to ask a question about complaining, or is this inappropriate?
No, go ahead. Let's see what happens.
Because yep. I actually find there's strength in numbers, and let's just say you and I are in a job together, and we have just been handed like 2 weeks work that we have to do in just a short amount of time. Then our kindred mind, if I go like this, hey, I'm really unhappy about getting all this work all of a sudden, and you go, I feel that way too, then in numbers, we can maybe create some momentum to get more time to do our job. Do you see that angle of it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to be talking, so you're starting to do some of the reframing that I'm going to propose really works well when we're talking about complaining. So hang on to that, Heidi, and let's see. I think you're halfway there in what I'm going to be proposing in just a moment. So hang on to that. Thank you for that. All right, so why do we complain? So there's some really good science out there around this. So its purpose is to allow the person to gain sympathy from others in their inadequacy to meet the situation. Another quote is, complaining allows us to achieve desired outcomes such as sympathy and attention. And the truth is, everybody does it. We want to be part of that. Complaining provides catharsis or emotional release, something especially true for those who have experienced trauma in their lives. It fills the void of discomfort and awkwardness, and ultimately, because it feels really good. It requires minimal risk, and it's easy, even if it's just momentary. There is one thing for sure. The research is super clear. So you know very well that our world is becoming, in many ways, very volatile, very unpredictable. The past few years have shown us that there's tons of good work out there around what we can do with this feeling of unpredictability. But we know something for sure too, that as unpredictability rises, so does complaining. It's the nature of the beast. It's part of how we deal with unpredictability is through that complaining. So if we're not going to deal with it now, then when? Now is the best time to start thinking about what we can do, how to reframe complaining in a way that is productive. So we get to what Heidi says. So we're not losing that momentum that happens through complaining, that connection that happens through complaining, but can we do it in a way where we're planting seeds that actually grow and blossom as opposed to those that are fallow? Oftentimes complaints are fallow. There's also some interesting science around the neurophysiology of complaining. So neurons that fire together wire together. Research shows that complaining rewires your brain for negativity, especially at the neurological level. This is what we were talking about earlier. It impacts your brain so much that both negative thinking and speech become an integral part. So the more that we do this, the more we start to craft these really specific neural pathways around this is the quickest thing that we go to. We go to it as a go-to response, the more that we do it. Complaining reinforces negative neural pathways and makes you see more problems than solutions. It reinforces our natural negative bias, and you start seeing negativity. So in many ways, complaining is legitimately bad for you, bad for your health, bad for your emotional state, bad for your organization, bad for everything. Even though we have, as Heidi pointed out, and as we keep talking, there are many things that we want to keep about when we come together in a community of complaint. So before I go into what we can do to reframe this, I want to say, because this is such a short session and we don't have a lot of time, I'm doing a follow-up session that will be a lunchtime session for you, for those of you in California. And we're going to do it next Thursday from 12 to 1. It's free. I just want to continue this conversation, and I want to workshop with you. If you come from a community of complaint, or if you find yourself complaining more than you want to, or you're with people that complain too much, or if you're a boss and you're a manager and you're looking at folks that are complaining, this would be a perfect opportunity. I hope that's, I don't know, is that a critique that I'm hearing, or is that either?
I'm laughing out loud.
Right, exactly. So next Thursday from 12 to 1, and the easiest way to register for that, it's going to be limited seating, is to use the QR code there, or we'll put the registration. Actually, I'll put that in chat as soon as I can, and we'll put the registration link in there too. So again, it will be just an hour long laser focused workshop, if you will, as a continuation of this. So here's the hope. Here's what's going on. This is what we know about how to transform complaining. So a recent study in the Journal of Social Psychology examined relationships between mindfulness, which is focusing one's attention on the present moment, happiness, and complaining. And what this study says is that mindfulness is connected to a sense of deliberateness. More mindful people tend to be more aware of how their current actions can affect future outcomes. Happier, more mindful individuals may be better at modulating their complaints, preferring to complain only when it serves a purpose. By contrast, people who are less mindful may complain more often, but to lesser effect. So for those of you that have a mindfulness practice of any kind, you are much less likely to complain in the fallow way that we were talking about. So there's productive complaining, right? Productive complaining is saying that I have an issue, I know some of the solutions, we can work together around this, let's figure this out. But it takes a real discerning sense for what is complaining in the negative fallow sense versus what is complaining in the productive sense. So that's the good news, right? So for those of us that are engaged in mindfulness practices, and if you're not, here's one more good reason for bringing up a practice for yourself in mindfulness. And mountains of research around why this is a great leadership best practice. I mean, that's what I do, is I work with leaders. So it's important, and we're all leaders in our own communities, in our own families, in our own ways. So I just want to highlight that notion of, if you don't have a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice or something along those lines, now is the time to start really starting to nurture that, because it will help you in so many different ways, including how you complain. But in the meantime, let's do something that we can all do, which is to reframe that complaining in a way that makes it more productive. So specifically, this is how I'm saying that we do it. So instead of complaining, we're going to look at explaining. So instead of complaining, we're going to look at explaining. So even coming into a new relationship, when you're working with people for the first time and you're getting together and you seem to want to move towards complaining, think about it in terms of explaining what's going on for you instead of complaining. I like to think of it as, instead of driving the BMW of bitching, moaning, and whining, we're going to start reframing that to driving what I call the VW, which is the values wish. So we're going to start talking about, what are our values that are not being satisfied here? What are our deeply held personal values that are not being satisfied in this particular situation? So by and large, complaints really have at their roots the seeds of unmet desires, hopes, and values. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find those seeds in our complaints and to grow them, and so that they're not falling on fallow ground, so they actually have the potential to grow. And there's a great model for reframing that comes from the Coactive Training Institute that's called Stake Impact Outcome. So I want you to think about this. Think about a complaint maybe that you have or that you had in your breakout session, and think if you can reframe it to follow this model. So what it says is, instead of going to the complaint, instead of saying the boss micromanages me and pushes all my buttons, instead to speak from, well, what's most important to you? What's the unrealized value at the core of your complaint or dissatisfaction? Now, sometimes you got to kind of tease that apart a little bit to see what it is, but it may be about connection. It may be about validation. It may be about support, right? Especially I'm thinking about in the boss example, it may be about trust, maybe all those things, but to come in contact with your own vulnerability around this, where that complaint is coming from, is the beginning of transforming complaint into commitment. And then beyond that, we want to go from, well, what happens for you? So as I'm explaining, so let's say I'm talking with Kristen and she and I are starting to talk about something that's important to us and we start moving into complaint. I might move it into saying, Kristen, that's all well and good, but what's happening for me is that I just don't feel like I'm getting the trust that I deserve. And what happens for me when I don't get the trust that I deserve is that I'm not as productive, as engaged. So we're really starting to pull it apart and say, this is what's going on for me when my value is not being realized. And then beyond that, it's important to explain, well, there's value in realizing and meeting that unmet value, because it's not only for me, but it's for our team, it's for our organization, it's for our community. And so in that way, we can start to transform complaint into commitment. So let me pause here and let me see if there are any questions that are coming up. Yes, thanks, Daryl. Yeah, any questions that are coming up, or anybody have any comments so far? Yeah, and Daryl, the car thing works really well for me too. I catch, to catch people in their BMW works really, really well. Yeah, Heidi.
I would like a couple more words about a complaint to commitment. Can you elaborate on that thought a tiny bit more?
Yeah, you bet. So when I'm talking about reframing complaining into terminology and phrasing that has to do with your unmet commitment, your unmet value, we're really talking about a commitment that you have to that value. So when we come together discussing values, we are coming together talking about our own commitments, and in that we become a community of commitment. Does that help?
Yeah, I got to think about that one a little bit more, but I think I've got it kind of.
Yeah, stay with the deeply held personal value. If you have whatever your deeply held personal value is that you have a commitment to realizing that value. I mean, that's what we want. We want to realize our values, and in that's the way I'm reframing it. That's the way we're reframing it, so that we come together around our commitments, but it's the deeply held personal values as opposed to the complaint. I mean, they're close cousins in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of overlap, but we want to move to the things that are around our deeply held personal values as opposed to the easy way out. So let's see here. Any other comments, questions? Oh, thanks, Jeannie. Yes, Heidi. Okay, great, Heidi. Thank you. Oh yeah, Carmen. Hi.
Hi. So thank you so much for bringing this to light, this subject to light. So the concept is to stop the complaint in its tracks and change or realize what's really going on, like
Exactly.
the real deal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
And this is in the middle of, say, a conversation with a colleague.
So I think it has a variety of uses, right? So one is to catch ourselves in the complaining and to reframe it. Another is you can use this tool to elicit value clarification from people as opposed to just hearing the complaint. Another is now this is, it gets a little bit tricky when you start managing up with your boss, right? And but it is possible. It is very possible. And so it's a matter of finding what's most important to you and then elaborating on that. It's about explaining as opposed to complaining. Denora. Thanks, Carmen.
Yeah, I have a question about number 3, where it says what happens for us. Are we looking at what the outcome is for the organization?
The community.
The community? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So if we're making if we're, it's interesting. I mean, you don't have to do all 3 of these steps, but the most important step is that first step. What is the deeply held personal value that is not being satisfied? Can we talk about what that is, which is much more productive than just, this thing is not happening, period. But if we need to go beyond that, if we want to expand on that a bit more, especially if we're working with somebody in a community that may need a little bit of convincing for why this is the conversation to have, as opposed to the easy, seductive complaint, then we want to pull it out a little bit and say, not only is it, am I speaking from my deeply held personal value, but it's also when that value is realized, I am better. I'm a better person. I'm more productive. I'm more engaged. I'm more loving. I'm more empathetic, all those things. And when I do that, it tends to have, as we know, there's a viral effect with our emotions, whether it's the bad apple or it's the good apple. It progresses throughout the community. And so we can speak to, look, if I speak from my value and you understand my value and you do the same, well, we're going to grow together in that way. So we can start to have a more compelling argument for why a reframe is a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Great questions, y'all. All righty. So we're going to try this again, right? Don't leave yet, right? We're going to do it 5 minutes, you can imagine. So we're going to have the exact same situation, right? You're going to be in the same pairs, trios, foursomes, hopefully, and you're going to have the same conversation, but you're going to speak to it from the stake, impact, outcome, right? So I'm going to put this slide up again if you want to take a quick screenshot of it or a picture of it, but I want you to have the conversation now, and it's just 5 minutes. And instead of having a complaint fest, we're going to have a commitment fest. You're going to see what that feels like to have a conversation that's based in commitment as opposed to complaint. The exact same situation. You have a boss that micromanages, is quote unquote short with you, is all business, pushes all your buttons. Okay? All right. So Luis, if we could throw folks into a quick breakout, that would be terrific. Wonderful. Wonderful to see you all back here. So hopefully you had a different kind of experience. So I'm curious to hear how it went. So what in this last experience, this last breakout, what strengthened your relationships? And was there anything that detracted from your relationships? So tell me a little bit about what your experience was. And was it challenging or what, tell me a little bit about how it was for you. And feel free to throw it into chat or just raise your hand or come on off mute. We're all friends here. How was this last experience for you?
Hi, Daddy, it's Carmen.
Hey, Carmen.
Hi. So I think that this experience was exciting. It was exciting for me, and I think some of the sessions attendees as well, because it was solution based, one, and it was okay, so it was a lot more productive, so it felt better than the opposite of complaining. So it had a better vibe, so it had a better feeling to it, and yeah, productive, and just it felt like we could be superheroes I feel like I could be a superhero of the team if I expressed myself this way.
So Carmen, your check is in the mail. Thank you so much. That's exactly what I was hoping for. There's, and I'm reading some of the comments here about self-awareness, and there's so much about this that does not come easily for most people, right? And again, that's the allure of complaining, is this seductive drama, and it's actually really interesting. There's, especially in this day and age around social media, that there's and especially in the States, it doesn't happen around the world. It doesn't even happen in parts of Europe. But by and large, the number of negative posts online, and you probably see that in your own experience, right? Far outweigh the positive, right? So there's, as somebody said and what pointed out there, we have a negativity bias, and there's something about being pulled into the drama of the thing where we can all come together and say, yes, I agree with you. It's terrible. That's terrible. That becomes really hard to break through unless you do some of that deep dive into your own self-awareness, into your own vulnerability, into your own ability to be soft instead of hard. So I don't want you to think it comes easily. These were very artificial circumstances, right, that we were just in, but it works. It can work. And once it gets going, as a number of you have said, it becomes more productive. It becomes more solution focused. Heidi and I were talking about this during the break, that there's, you may not have the same values. You may not be sharing the same values, but what we're trying to do is to move towards, perhaps satisfying that value that you have that's not being satisfied in a way that we wouldn't have thought of if we were just complaining about it. Right? The value can be met in other ways. It all depends on what that value is. If we're talking about safety and security, maybe it's not about the person. Maybe it's about, just kind of go with me on this, but, it's about changing your work schedule. It's about, I don't know, creating a safer work environment, but or with the bad boss, I don't know where you all ended up, but with a bad boss, it could be about, I have to feel loved. I have to feel loved. What can I do to feel, well, maybe that's a different kind of conversation that I need to have with my boss, or maybe I can get that love and that support in other ways, be satisfied with that, so I can engage in a way that's not about complaining, but I still have that value met in other ways. So there's a concept called equifinality. We talk about this in organizational development all the time. And it's the idea of multiple paths can lead to the same solution, to the same outcome. So complaining always says that there's just one way of doing this and it's not happening and therefore it's wrong. Equifinality says, no, there are multiple ways. And by doing something like the methodology that we just used, we can start to understand different ways of satisfying that value. Yes. The VIA character strengths inventory, right on. Yes, and Marty. Yep, Marty Seligman, one of my heroes. Absolutely. Awesome. Yep, values inventory. Yep, exactly. Yeah, we didn't have a lot of time with this, but we're not really good about being in touch with our values and being able, or our feelings, and being able to name them, our feelings or our values. So sometimes a list, like the values inventory, can be really helpful, so people can say, oh, that's it. That's the feeling that I'm having. Again, with nonviolent communication, if any of you are familiar with that, there's a whole list of feelings. And in my closet over here, I have a big stack of cards of feelings. And so I bring it to clients and we say, well, what's the feeling here? And they say, that's the feeling that I have. So it doesn't come easily for us. How about anybody else? Anything else about that last experience? The feelings wheel. Ooh, I like that, Shaniqua. Well, I hope it felt productive for you. And the emotions that came up for you were far more positive than negative. My challenge to you is to think about it for yourself, but also for the people that you care for and love, whether it's at work or in your family, is, have some fun with complaining. If it feels good, a little bit of that goes a long way, but it's like sugar. It's like anything. We don't want to do a lot of it. So do what you can. Be the change agent that moves us from complaint to commitment and start that process, start that movement. So we're going to finish up here. And yes, great. Yep, I'm going to go right here. And just as a reminder, we're going to do a follow-up to this after you've done some thinking about this. This is just for now conference attendees, for you specifically, but feel free to share it with other folks that have attended the conference. And again, if you do sign up, please protect it in your calendar. We're not charging for anything for this, so it's important that that you follow through on your commitment. So please, it's only an hour, and I hope we'll get to see you there. So I'm going to finish up there and going to stick around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to continue this conversation or have any questions about what we're talking about here, about moving from complaint to commitment. But I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And if you could do something that I like to do with all my workshops, if everybody can take themselves off mute at the count of 3 and just say so long and farewell, that would be great. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Happy
Bye.
life.
Bye.